to this week's edition of Gospel Weekly. How exciting that we're at our second week of Lent already. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark, chapter 9, verses 2 through 10. Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and went up high on a mountain where they could be alone. There, in front of the disciples, Jesus was completely changed, and his clothes became much whiter than any bleach on earth could make them. Then Moses and Elijah were there talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Teacher, is it good for us to be here? Let us make 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." But Peter and the others were terribly frightened, and he did not know what he was talking about. The shadow of a cloud passed over and covered them. From the cloud a voice said, "This is my son, and I love him. Listen to what he says." At once the disciples looked around, but they saw only Jesus. As Jesus and the disciples were coming down the mountain, he told them not to say a word about what they had seen until the Son of Man had been raised from the dead. So they kept it to themselves. But they wondered what he meant by the words, "raised from the dead." The Gospel of the Lord. And now some of our Gospel Weekly friends are going to reflect on this Gospel with you. Enjoy!
Today we know that Jesus rose from the dead. We know this because it's in the Scriptures. We celebrate this miracle all the time, but especially on Easter. Right now we're in the second week of Lent in anticipation and preparation of the celebration of Easter, the wonderful miracle of Christ's resurrection. In the Gospel, Jesus took his disciples high on a mountain. Jesus looked totally changed. He was in pure white, and then a shadow passed over them, and they heard a voice say,
"This is my son. I love him. Listen to what he says."
This was very frightening for the disciples because they could not see where the voice was coming from. Can you imagine what this was like for the disciples? Jesus spoke to the disciples and said that they were to say nothing of what they saw until Jesus was raised from the dead. The disciples had never heard such a thing, but they did exactly as he asked. Would you be able to keep such a secret from everyone you knew if Jesus asked you to? The disciples could not even understand what they were being told by Jesus. How could he be raised from the dead? However, they were obedient. During these next few weeks of Lent, let's try and consider what it was like for the disciples during this time of uncertainty and anticipations of what was coming. They did not know what to expect, and sure they were wondering how it would happen. Let's focus on the obedience and the faith the disciples had in Jesus while we celebrate Lent. Spend your time of Lent in joy and wonderment of what it actually means that Jesus rose from the dead. The only thing the disciples had to rely on was what Jesus was telling them. Let's practice trusting Jesus.